I never thought the skills that once made me a ghost for the government would be the same ones I'd used to bury the men who thought they could erase my family's history with a single stroke of a pen and a bulldozer. I spent 22 years behind a scope, living in the dirt and breathing through a straw, all so I could come home to the one thing that kept me sane, my grandfather's ranch, a legacy that survived the Great Depression and 2 world wars, but couldn't survive a group of greedy developers and a corrupt local council. They didn't just take the land, they destroyed the person I was supposed to become after the uniform came off, and they laughed while they did it. Before I tell you how I turned their multimillion-dollar vision into a graveyard of broken dreams, I have to ask you something. If everything you loved was stripped away by people who thought they were untouchable, how far would you go to make sure they felt the weight of every brick they tore down? Was I wrong to use my specialized training to protect a legacy that the law refused to defend? Or would you have done the exact same thing if you had the sights aligned? To understand why I did what I did, you have to understand what that ranch meant to me. It wasn't just 300 acres of dirt and cattle. It was the only place on earth where the sound of gunfire didn't mean someone was dying. My grandfather, a man who spoke more with his hands than his mouth, taught me how to track deer in those woods and how to respect the silence of the valley. When I joined the service and became a long-range marksman, that ranch was the mental happy place I went to during the 48-hour stalks in the desert. I sent every spare cent of my but pay back home to keep the fences mended and the taxes paid. When I finally retired 3 years ago, I came back with a heavy heart and a lot of ghosts, looking for nothing but peace. For 2 years, I had it. I spent my mornings fixing the old barn and my evenings watching the sun dip behind the ridge. But then came Marcus Thorne and his firm, Thorne Heritage Holdings. The name was a joke. They didn't care about heritage. They cared about high-end condos and golf courses. Thorne was a man who smelled like expensive cologne and looked like he'd never had dirt under his fingernails in his life. He showed up at my gate with a smile that didn't reach his eyes and an offer that was essentially an insult. He wanted the valley. He wanted my ridge. He wanted to turn the creek where I learned to swim into a decorative water feature for a clubhouse. I told him to get off my property, and I thought that was the end of it. I was naive. Men like Thorne don't take no for an answer. They just change the rules of the game. Over the next 6 months, my life became a living hell. Suddenly, the county was hitting me with zoning violations I'd never heard of. My water rights were being challenged in court by a concerned citizens group that was clearly funded by Thorne's shell companies. Then, the accidents started. My fences were cut in the middle of the night, letting my cattle wander onto the highway. A small fire, spontaneously, started in my tool shed. I went to the sheriff, a man named Miller who I'd known since high school, but he just looked at his boots and told me his hands were tied. He said the progress a Thorne was bringing would save the town's failing economy. It was clear the entire town council had been greased. The final straw came when they used an obscure eminent domain loophole, claiming my land was underutilized and necessary for a new public utility corridor that surprise ran right through the heart of my property and connected directly to Thorne's planned development. They gave me 30 days to pack up 70 years of history. When I tried to fight it in court, my lawyer, the best I could afford, told me the paperwork was airtight. Thorne had bought the judge, the jury, and the executioner. On the day the eviction notice was pinned to my door, I sat on my porch and watched as a survey crew started marking the trees my grandfather had planted. I saw Thorne standing there in a hard hat, pointing at my house and laughing with his lead contractor. They thought I was just some broken-down vet they could bully. They forgot that I spent 2 decades learning how to wait, how to observe, and how to strike when the enemy feels most secure. So that's the situation I was in. I had lost my home, my history, and my future to a group of men who thought their bank accounts made them gods. I was backed into a corner with nothing left to lose, and a very specific set of skills that the world had paid me a lot of money to master. Before I tell you how I spent those final 30 days and the absolute chaos that unfolded on the morning the bulldozers arrived, I want you to pause. Look at the reality of how these big corporations steamroll the little guy. What would you do? Would you take the measly settlement check and move into a quiet apartment in the city? Or would you dig your heels in and fight back with everything you had? Pause the video right now and comment below. Would you have sought legal revenge? Or would you have taken matters into your own hands like I did? I really want to know if I'm the villain in your eyes or just a man protecting his home. I didn't pack a single box. Instead, I went to my basement and opened a crate that hadn't been touched since I left the service. I didn't need a rifle to kill them, that would be too easy. And I didn't want to spend my life in a cage for murder. No, I wanted to destroy Thorne the way he destroyed me, by taking away his legacy and his fortune. I began what we call a site preparation phase. For 3 weeks, I moved through my own woods at night like a ghost. I knew every inch of that terrain, every soft spot in the soil, every underground drainage pipe. Thorne's crew had already moved their heavy machinery onto the edge of the property, ready for the groundbreaking ceremony. That was supposed to be a massive PR event with the governor and the local press. What they didn't know was that I had spent my nights sabotaging every single piece of equipment in ways that wouldn't be visible until they were under load. I didn't just pour sugar in tanks. I used specialized compounds to weaken hydraulic lines and sensors. But the real work was in the ground. I knew where the main water lines for the entire county ran under my property. I also knew where the old mine shafts from the 1008. Hundreds were shafts that weren't on any modern map, but were etched into my grandfather's hand, drawn charts. The morning of the groundbreaking was a beautiful, clear day. Thorne was there in a tailored suit, standing on a wooden stage built right over what used to be my grandmother's rose garden. There were cameras, a ribbon, and a giant ceremonial pair of scissors. I was watching from a concealed position on the ridge, 300 yards away, looking through the same glass I'd used in the mountains of the Hindu Kush. As Thorne started his speech about building the future, I triggered the first structural adjustment. A series of small, controlled subterranean shifts, nothing that would hurt anyone, but enough to cause a massive sinkhole right under the heavy machinery. The look of pure terror on the operator's face as the multimillion-dollar excavator tipped slowly into the earth was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. But I wasn't done. As the crowd panicked, the utility corridor they had fought so hard for began to rupture. I had calculated the pressure points perfectly. A geyser of water erupted, flooding the entire construction site and turning their prime real estate into a swamp within minutes. Thorne was screaming, trying to get the cameras to stop filming, but the press was loving the disaster. That's when I sent the final gift. I had compiled every single email, every recorded bribe, and every piece of evidence of Thorne's donations. To the council members, which I had gathered by visiting their offices in the dead of night over the previous month, I hit send on an encrypted blast to every major news outlet in the state. By the time the water stopped flowing, the FBI was already opening the files. The project was immediately halted for environmental and structural investigations that would take years to resolve. The lawsuits from the investors started piling up by sunset. Thorne Heritage Holdings didn't just fail, it imploded. Thorne lost his company, his reputation, and eventually, his freedom when the bribery charges stuck. The land, it was declared a geologically unstable zone, and was eventually bought back by a land conservancy for pennies on the dollar. A conservancy I had helped set up anonymously with my life savings. The ranch is quiet again now. The bulldozers are gone, replaced by the sound of the wind through the pines. I don't own the deed anymore, but I'm the head caretaker for the conservancy, living in a small cabin on the far edge of the woods. The town still talks about the curse of the valley and the day the earth swallowed Marcus Thorne's ego. But I just sit on my porch and watch the deer come back to the creek. I lost the house I grew up in, but I saved the land that raised me. Sometimes the only way to win a war is to make the cost of occupying your territory too high for the enemy to pay. I don't regret a single second of it. Thorne thought he was playing a game of chess, but he forgot that he was playing against a man who spent his life winning wars from the shadows. If you found this story powerful and believe that some things are worth fighting for regardless of the cost, please like this video. It helps me know that there are still people out there who value legacy over a paycheck. Subscribe to the channel for more stories of justice, revenge, and the lengths people will go to protect what's theirs. What would you have done differently? Tell me your final thoughts on this whole mess in the comments section below. I read every single one. Until next time, keep your eyes open and your head down. I'll see you all in the next story.